on today's Story Beat.
So 300,000 books were published in 2020. Forget when they say it's a bad time for publishing. It's just something that they say. Maybe they're feeling it is because they've had a few rejections, but just don't let that dissuade you. Keep up. People still love to read, and especially with audiobooks now and, Kindles and other ways of reading, books are being published. So that would be a big tip. When they tell you that, just don't believe it.
This is StoryBeat with Steve Cuden, a podcast for the creative mind. StoryBeat explores how masters of creativity develop and produce brilliant works that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on Story Beat. We're coming to you from the Steel City, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My guest today, Elyce Wakerman, is the author of the novel A Tale of Two Citizens and two works of nonfiction, Father Loss, Daughters Discuss the Man That Got Away, and Air Powered, The Art of the Airbrush. Her essays and articles have appeared in nycitywoman.com, the Los Angeles Times, the Jewish Journal, and numerous magazines. Her TV writing credits include Webster, What's Happening Now, and Safe at Home. Elyce is currently at work on a screenplay about a mother-daughter relationship called Is That What You're Wearing? Elyce taught writing at California State University, Northridge from 1999 to 2012, and she also happens to be married to one of my favorite Story Beat guests, filmmaker Jeff Werner. So for all those reasons and many more, it's a great pleasure for me to have the brilliant writer Elyce Wakerman join me today on Story Beat. Elyce, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so glad you're with me today. So let's go way back in time. What were your earliest inspirations and influences? Why did you start to write in the first place? How old were you?
Well, I started writing really when I was about 12, and I consider my diaries to be my early writing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I was very reflective as a child. I think I was kind of introverted and shy.
Right.
And I wanted to, but I was very, so as the person that was always kind of on the outside of the circle, I wanted to write about what my feelings were about that. You
actually knew early on in life that you wanted to expose your feelings in writing on paper.
Absolutely. Yes.
And your first feelings and those kinds of inner thoughts came out in a diary.
That's right.
Have you ever thought about publishing your diaries? Or
I have a stack of them in a box in the garage. They're very neatly, tied together with a rubber band. And every now and then I poke in there. And it's wonderful to stay in touch with the child that you were.
Oh, sure.
And, like someone named Jack broke my heart. I don't remember Jack at all, which is very strange.
Well, Jack, wherever you are, stop that.
Stop it, really. But I just think that I needed an outlet for the things that were churning around in my mind. And so my diaries, I consider my earliest writing. I have never considered publishing them, but I do. For instance, I recently wrote an essay, taking you all the way to the other part of life. It's an essay for an anthology called What Falls Away Is Always. It's coming out in the fall.
Mm-hmm.
And they were looking for essays about what it's like to be 60 or over.
Right.
And has it affected the way you write and how you think about writing? And so I wrote an essay for that book.
What was your conclusion? What did you decide? Do you write differently?
My conclusion is, and the title of my piece is, Maybe I've Always Been Old. Because I've always wanted to write. And I think that writing ultimately is the impulse to capture, to not lose. To not lose your impressions, the Thursday when you were nervous about a geology test, the wonderful experience you had with friends on a hike. You want to capture everything, the people you meet. I used to have a fantasy that at some point in my life, I would have a big party with everybody I ever knew,
Right.
because I don't want to lose people. Now, this may come from, and the diaries might be related to that. Um, I lost my father when I was 3. He
Oh,
died. I didn't physically lose him. He died. And I think that there was always this hole, that I needed to fill.
sure.
And I filled it with my words. And in fact, my diaries are written to Dear Daddy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting that you didn't just write your thoughts down, but you actually expressed it to someone.
Yes.
Do
Yes.
you feel that that was an important thing for you to do when you look back on it?
I think it was very important. I think it helped me develop a sense of humor,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of, instead of just seeing something as an affront, to kind of get an ironic spin to it,
Right.
and to laugh at my own self. And, my mother was rather mercurial, so I needed very much to write about that. And so that's how I see writing,
And,
as something, as the need to capture.
and you saw yourself as a kind of an interior person as a child. You were more interior than exterior. And
Yes.
this was your way of getting it out, getting it
Yeah.
off your
Yeah.
chest, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
I think that that's really valuable for people to understand. Not everybody does that. I didn't journal as a kid. In fact, I don't journal now, but my mind is filled with stuff all the time. So I'm assuming yours is too, that you have a rich imagination.
Absolutely. F. Scott Fitzgerald said that you don't write because you want to, you write because you have to.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And
I,
it's
I, I
just,
love I love Stephen King's quote about people say to him, you're such a good writer, why do you write this horror stuff? Why do you write that? And his answer always is, what makes you think I have a choice?
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
So that you're
That's right.
expressing something similar. Well, you need to get it out of you, and that's the way you're doing it. You're expressing it on paper or on a screen or however it is. So all right, so where did you get your training? I know you were writing all along, but was that your training, or did you go to school to be a writer?
Well, I think the diaries are training just in moving pencil or pen across paper. Now, of course, there's the computer, but I love the tactile act of writing.
Right.
That's like I write most of my stuff in longhand, and then I plug it into the computer. I didn't get any formal training. I took a playwriting course at NYU, and I think that was a real pivotal experience, because not only was there a fabulous teacher named
Who?
Bill Vorenberg. He
Okay.
was our teacher for playwriting, and his words of wisdom that I taught my students at Cal State Northridge when I taught creative writing, when I taught playwriting. Um, if you have 2 characters in a room, you will get your story.
Interesting.
It's the characters first. They will give you a story. 2 people together make something happen. But in any event, so Bill was very, we had the incredible privilege that semester of having Manny Aizenberg
Mm,
be the visiting professor. So maybe he was a student of Bill Vorenberg's at some point, but Manny Aizenberg took us to see the previews of every single thing that opened on Broadway that season.
nice.
And I think William Goldman wrote a book about that season. It might have even been called The Season. I don't remember.
I think it is called The Season. Tell the listeners who Manny Aizenberg was.
Well, maybe when I met Manny Aizenberg, when he was the assistant professor in that, or the visiting professor in that class, he was a stage manager, and he went on to be one of the major producers and impresarios on Broadway. He did all of Neil Simon's plays,
Mm-hmm.
and on into the future. And we sort of have maintained a kind of, let's put it this way, when I call, Manny picks up.
That's good.
Okay. Now he won't want to hear this, but he might be up in years now, but not that much. But But recently, my daughter, wasn't that recently, but she was she was interviewing for a job at William Morris Agency. And she was one of what her agent told her was, don't get anyone to make a call for you to get this job until you're one of two people. Like, don't try to have anybody step in for you. And so she became one of two people they were considering. I called Manny. I told him my daughter, fresh out of college, is applying for this job. And I told him the name of the agent that she was, hoping to be the assistant for. And he said, call me when she gets the job. So she did.
Well, it's always valuable to, if nothing else, to have that sort of in your hip pocket.
Absolutely. So anyway, so Manny, what we had to do in exchange for getting to see all these Broadway openings was to write a review.
Okay.
And Manny called me aside after I had written 2 or 3 of these reviews, and he said, you should be a writer. So that was I don't think until that point, although I would have loved to be a writer, I was a working class girl in New York City. There was no way that I was actually I had to get a job. I was a very kind of pragmatic and logical person. But that was very encouraging.
Well, it's very difficult for people to become professional writers. Most people, the occasional one like a Truman Capote comes along and hits it very early and young, but becoming a professional is really hard. And so when someone says to you, a professional says you should become a writer, that's a major encouragement to take that step.
It is. And so what did I do? I graduated college. I did get a job, a wonderful job in teaching. But I wrote a play immediately. I sent it to Manny and he said, no. I mean, keep writing, but this is, naturally you think, okay, he's telling me to be a writer. I'll write a play quickly, send it to him. It'll be on Broadway. And, I'm done.
Oh, it's just that easy. You just send it off and it's automatically on Broadway. Yeah. What else? What other kinds of things did you write while you were in school?
Well, of course I did I wrote, I was tapped by Bill Vorenberg at that point. He wanted to get me together with the kind of genius on campus that everybody was hearing about, who was a composer. And Bill wanted to get me and this guy together to write the school musical for that year.
Right.
And that person was Alan Menken.
Oh, just Alan Menken.
Just Alan Menken.
Oh my goodness.
Who already knew that. Alan Menken is of a category that he immediately, when he was 19 years old, he knew he was a genius and he was bound for glory, and he was. But Alan and I wrote the school musical. It was called Separate Ways. And, it went on at NYU. And then I sent one of the actors in the musical, who was a student, went to Boston that summer, and he showed the director of a theater company the script for the musical. And so she did it. It was called the Hub Theater Company.
Right.
And so this musical that I wrote I guess I was a senior at NYU, was done in Boston. So that was very exciting. And I love musicals. I think nothing makes me happier than being around a musical, seeing one I was also in musicals as a teenager. I was a singer. And so I performed in musicals, and then to go on to write one was very exciting.
Well, and not just one, but one with Alan Menken.
And one with Alan Menken. How about that?
So, and for anyone who doesn't know who Alan Menken is, he and Howard Ashman wrote Little Shop of Horrors and Beauty and the Beast, and he's gone on and written tons of other big things. And he's, I don't know how many Oscars he's won or how many times he's won.
He's been massively successful, as well he should be. He's very talented.
Well,
it was a lot of fun to write with him. A lot of fun.
Exactly. So at what point in your life of being a writer, now you're early in life and you're writing and you're struggling a little bit and you're trying to find your way and so on, just like all writers do, Was there a juncture, was it earlier or later, where you thought to yourself, you know what, I'm actually pretty good at this? Did you have one of those moments?
Well, I think I knew I was good at it always because I
Hmm.
get so lost in it. When I'm writing, I am in that milieu, whatever I'm writing about, whether it's an apartment building in New York City, which was Separate Ways, or it's a shtetl in Poland, which, is part of A Tale of Two Citizens, or even if I'm writing an essay, I get so lost in the act of writing. Like most writers, I'm very, very good at procrastinating and putting it off and thinking of all kinds. We absolutely have to have bananas in the house. I have to go to the market. It's just awful that we don't have any. But once I'm into it and doing it, I just get lost in it, and I'm truthfully not thinking about the commercial side of it. I really love to write.
You get into what I call, or many, and not just me, but many people call the zone.
I do, yes.
And when you're in that zone, time goes by, hours can go by, and you look up and go, what happened? 4 hours slipped by.
Absolutely. I
I,
don't, I don't listen to music. I turn my cell phone off. I don't turn my landline off because I figure my kids know if they need to reach me, I'll answer the phone.
mhm.
Um, but I don't, everybody needs a different kind of atmosphere for when they're writing. Some like to go to a public place when that's allowed again. They like to sit in Starbucks or wherever, or outside or at the park. I like to be in my office where I am right now and at my desk, and with a pad and pen, or at my computer, and just get totally lost.
Well, you and me both. Now I'm curious, because you do a lot of writing both in your head, obviously you're still working out of your mind space, but you're working in your office. How do you observe the world? What is your technique for observing people? Are you a people watcher when you're out, or how do you go about that?
Well, I think I am a people watcher and a people analyzer. I'm very sensitive to other people's feelings and motivations, and why did she just say that? And I'll think about what motivates people, and I'm very sensitive to not wanting to hurt people's feelings.
Hmm.
And when someone else hurts someone's feelings, um, I feel it. So I think that's all stored up, and I put it into, why is someone being brash? Where does so and so get his unbridled courage to just press forward? I think part of me is psychologist. I'm very into what motivates people, what makes them tick.
I think it's interesting that the things that you've used as examples are more or less based on some form of conflict, which of course I think is the heart and soul of what makes great drama work.
Right.
And without that conflict, you don't have very much. And that's what you're picking up on that, and then you get to use that material in your work.
Yes,
Uh, uh,
absolutely.
that's an accurate way to go at it, I assume. So, all right, let's talk for a little bit about writing a book, because you've written a number of them. You've written both fiction and nonfiction. So let's talk about fiction books for a moment, novels. What would you say are the biggest challenges that you have when you're setting out to write a novel? What is aside from that, it's a big chunk to bite off, but what are the big challenges that you find?
Well, for me, I guess as I've already established, and I'm hearing myself, and I think that everything I say is true.
Well, that's good.
I think I start with the characters. And so what gets me, the biggest challenge for me is finding the story. Um, but as Bill Vornberg said, and I keep those words handy, if you have your characters, you'll find your story.
Hmm. Hmm.
But for me, that's the biggest challenge, is to move the story along and to get the conflict and suspense so that the reader, because you are writing for readers, it's not just filling the time. You want people to read when you write stuff, because that's it's a form of communication. I mean, journaling is very good, probably for mental health. And anyone who does it just for their own relief, that's great. But as a professional writer, you're writing for readers.
Mm-hmm.
And what will get them interested mainly, I think, is character, and finding themselves in a character. But they also want a good story, a good story from, the main character wants this, and there are all these obstacles in the way, and what's going to happen? What will happen?
So plotting is where you work the hardest to overcome whatever those
Yes.
challenges are.
Yes.
So you start knowing characters that are interesting to you. You may not know what they're going to do, but you like these characters.
I know they're going to do something good. And one of the things that I used to tell my students, and that I have found, and that some people find, I think even Philip Roth commented on it. There's been all this writing about him because he recently died. And he said, I'm not one of those people who, listens to my characters. I am. I really find that my characters will give me the story if I just allow them to breathe. And there's a very good example of that in A Tale of Two Citizens.
Mm-hmm.
The two characters, well, I started obviously with two characters. The immigrant who entered the country illegally, and the immigration official who is very offended by immigrants who enter illegally. He doesn't call them immigrants, he calls them upstarts. And this immigration official was married, and I hadn't really thought much about her. He was just going to be married to his childhood sweetheart. And in a scene in the book where I have her buying some apples from the illegal immigrant, I was going to stay with the illegal immigrant who's kind of developing a crush on her. So she buys her apples and she walks away, but I wanted to go with her. Suddenly Barbara, it's funny, I keep using the name Barbara. Barbara took me with her, and she became a main character in the book. So it's like you need to go with your characters, and they will provide.
So I'm going to paraphrase Callie Curry, the great screenwriter who wrote Thelma and Louise. And I'm sure I'm close to the quote, but not the exact quote, which is, she said that you need to find the quiet in order to hear your characters speak.
Absolutely.
And that's what you're talking about. You're listening in your mind's eye for characters speaking, so that then leads you down the road you're trying to go to. Do you then, how do you go about the creation of the whole story? Do you outline? Do you just start and let them talk on paper, and then it comes to you? Are you someone that plans out in advance what you're going to write?
I don't have, there was recently an article about Ishiguro, the great writer of Remains of the Day, and where he describes that he actually has like a spreadsheet and a blueprint, and he's very methodical. That's one way of doing it, and it certainly has done him well because he's written such beautiful books. I have a vague idea of what the story is. In Tale of Two Citizens, I knew that there was a young man who comes to the United States. He has to lie to get in, which is reason to be deported. And I knew that there was going to be an immigration official who was trying to get him out. It was almost like, that story, The Fugitive.
Right.
Those were the two main forces, and those were the two. And I would follow both their stories because I wanted even my villain to be someone that we cared about and whose heart would break over things, and we would feel for him. Someone who read the book wrote to me that she could tell that I loved all my characters, and I found that very rewarding because it's true. Even the ones who do the most dastardly things, I'm feeling them. I know that they're human. So in answer to your question, I had my skeleton. I knew what was going to happen, what Harry wanted, which was to become a citizen,
Right.
even though he had lied. And I knew he could be in big trouble. And I knew how that was going to resolve itself. I didn't know that Barbara, the immigration official's wife, was going to play quite an instrumental role in both their lives. So what I do is I have my skeleton, but I don't stick to it religiously. I allow the work to breathe, and I allow it to surprise me. And when people say that, and I trust, like, look, if someone does something that doesn't work, of course you get rid of it. But I don't consider writing lonely because I have a lot of company in here.
You're surrounded by good friends and maybe some not so good friends, and that's exactly
That's
what
right.
you need.
That's
And
right.
do you, so in other words, you have an idea of a beginning, middle, and end, but you
Right.
may not have the details worked out in between.
That's right. That's right. And I'm open to, as I said, I'm open to roads, and literally with the Barbara character, she took me on a road I wasn't. When I sat down to write that day, Barbara was not going to walk to her apartment and take out a bottle of booze because she's a secret alcoholic. But it just kind of happened.
Mm.
That wasn't in my skeleton, and she wasn't particularly in my skeleton. So,
And do you ever feel intimidated by not know what the details are, or you just let it flow?
oh, I love it when it happens. I told my students it's kind of schizophrenic, but you're like hearing voices. And, since they are coming from you, obviously, trust them, because they may open up paths that you hadn't anticipated.
So you just said something that I find interesting that I talk to lots of writers about, and in fact, lots of creative people, not just writers. Do you feel like you are the generator of the work, or do you feel like it's coming to you and it's working through you from some outside source or force?
I feel that I want to just uh, repeat something that Norman Mailer. I have two views on writing that I kind of subscribe to both of them. But Norman Mailer said, novels don't always come your way. It's like falling in love. You can't say, oh, gee, I think I'm ready to fall in love, and then meet someone who's perfect. When a novel comes, it's a grace.
It's a grace.
It's a grace.
I
And
asked I asked the question because so many creative people say, and it's in my research as well, my studies as well, that many creative people, scientists, doctors, artists, and so on, that they feel like they're a conduit for the whatever the outcome is, that it's not really them, that it's coming through them. Do you ever feel
right.
that way or not?
Well, I'm not, that's a little new agey, like I'm not channeling,
Right.
but I feel that, Norman Mailer goes on to say, after he says it's a grace, he says it's like something in the universe has forgiven you long enough to allow you to, get in touch with this topic or this character. I feel that it's both. I feel that you have to be open. You never know when the idea is going to come. I was doing some late night reading a couple of months ago. I think it was a Joan Nesbo detective thing, but there was a sentence in there that I misread because it was late at night, but my misreading led me to an idea that I think might be my next book.
Huh, interesting.
And I won't talk about it right now, but it was like it wasn't really on the page, but my kind of mixing up a couple of words made me think, wow. And then I saw it wasn't there. So it was coming to me from somewhere.
Interesting. So I'm curious, you've also written nonfiction books,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not filled with characters, are they, or are they?
Well, Father Lost certainly was. And the same way of working applies to my nonfiction, in that my research then becomes incredibly interesting, and I am really into it. Now, I'm not following people on a path that, isn't true, but I love to be informed by if I had a hunch about something, and then it turns out that many people have thought this, and there is a theory about it, and it has been found to be true. So I do get lost in the work in the same way.
Mhm.
But nonfiction, of course, now Father Loss is filled with wonderful interviews. And the story, it's basically put together with my story of my father dying, and then interviews with women who grew up without a father. And it was basically looking into the effects of, how does growing up without a father affect girls? There was a lot of material by Freud, among others, about how losing a father or a mother affected boys. There was nothing about girls. And so after my first book was published, I was talking with a girlfriend of mine. We both grew up without fathers. And she said, "Why don't you write a book about it? I mean, you care about it, and you're now a published author." And so I did.
You were both inspired and sort of challenged to do so.
Absolutely. And very personally curious. And I think when you're writing nonfiction, and I'm sure every nonfiction writer would say this, is that you're deeply interested in the subject and you want to know everything there is to know. And you do get lost in it in the same way.
What would you say are the major things that you learned in doing that? But both in the story itself, or the stories themselves, and also in your process. What did you gain from it?
Well, I gained an understanding of how growing up without a father affects you. And of course, the first man you ever loved was gone. So that's going to have an effect on you.
Mhm.
And you're going to question yourself. And your relationships with men may tend to be a little, emotionally charged. And you're constantly sure that they're going to leave. I mean, if the first guy left, why won't they all? So that was some kind of a strand running through it.
Is that a trust issue where you don't trust they're always going to be there for you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I personally didn't quite have that issue, but most of the women in the book did.
Interesting. So you, in both fiction and nonfiction, you're a believer in research, in digging in and finding things out.
Absolutely. And even in the novel, it's set in the 1930s, so there was a lot of room for research. And God bless Google, I gotta say. I'm writing a scene. I'm writing a scene where the aunt is making pancakes for her beloved nephew, who is my illegal immigrant. And she puts them, she takes them out of the frying pan and puts them on paper towels for the fat to drain through.
Right.
And then I think, did they have paper towels in 1932? I can quickly go to Google and find out when there were first paper towels. They did. But then I realized that it would be more likely that a woman, of her economic level, at her economic level, would probably use a paper bag. But you can just find out stuff immediately. And I found it just to authenticate the book. But the biggest piece of research that I did for that book was really a life-changing experience that I'd like to tell you about.
Sure, please.
You can do just so much reading and so much research. There's nothing like going to the source. And I felt it was very important to go to Poland, where about a third of the book takes place. And so through a really unlikely way, I won a raffle and I got a trip to Switzerland. I won a round trip ticket to Switzerland, and Warsaw isn't that far from Zurich.
Right.
So we went to Warsaw, and I had a photograph of the house that my father, because of course The Immigrant is based on my father's life. It's a big reveal, but all my writing has in one way or another been related to all my published writing.
You'd
He's
say
kind
that
of,
that's a through line theme in your work.
yes, yes. Father loss for sure. I wanted to find out how his absence affected me. And A Tale of Two Citizens, I gave him a life. I had little bits and pieces about his life, and I filled in the rest. So I had a photograph of the house that he grew up in, and he lived with a Christian family. He and his Jewish family and this Christian family shared a farmhouse, which is kind of unbelievable. Their name was Handra. And I had heard about them, just wisps of a name. And we found an interpreter, we meaning Jeff and I, we found a guide and interpreter who drove us to this little teeny town of Stavki that isn't even on the map. And a man who was known as the ambassador for the Jews, because all the Jews are going back to Poland to try to, not all, but a lot of people are. And we showed him the picture of the house, and he said the name Handra, and I just thought I would faint because that's the name I've heard. And this, of course, this is all in Polish. He and the interpreter are going on. He makes a phone call. Chris, the interpreter, says, "Let's go to the house." And it was hard to find the house, but we did. And Stavki is basically the intersection of 4 dirt roads.
Oh, wow.
And we get out of the car pulls in, 2 German shepherds. Like, I'm a Jew in Poland and German shepherds are running at me. I'm not that willing to get out of the car.
Oh, gosh.
A very, very old man and a kind of youngish, handsome, strapping man come out of the house. And they cannot believe that a Wakerman is standing in their front lawn because the old man was a teenager when his father hid my family.
Wow.
And the younger man has grown up hearing about this. And here I am. So it was an afternoon out of a kind of Swedish movie, it was a beautiful golden day. He immediately, the younger guy, called his sister to come, that Elyce Wakerman is here. And it's one of those things that you wish you had a camera because it was just so remarkable. They walked me down to the river Bug, which is, where many scenes in the book take place. I knew that my father used to ice skate on that river. And they brought us into the house, and the house, every wall was a very modest house, believe me. My interpreter said, if you need to go to the bathroom, don't go to the bathroom. Okay. The walls were covered with the oil paintings that the younger man, it turns out, is a painter. And they laid out all of their finest sausage and wine, and they made a real spread for us. And the younger man, who spoke not a word of English, didn't even know yes or okay or anything, he raises a wine glass and says, "L'chaim."
Oh, there you go. Wow.
So it was a magical day. And then as we were leaving, I was just sobbing because, I just realized that through my entire life, my kindergarten, my junior high, my marriage, my children, everything, this Handra family has lived in this house. And I'll never see them again, although I did get to, but in any event. And the Handras are in the book. As we were leaving, the young man took down a painting from the wall and gave it to me. It's a picture of the house.
Well, that's amazing.
And so I could write about them, and I could write about the fields and the river and the house that this, Himmelbaum family lives in with such, I was there. So, it's kind of like when you said you have to live and go out of your office in order to find material. It's true. All the research in the world didn't, of course, evoke those feelings. Also, it turns out that storks are a huge part of Poland, and they build their nests on poles. Incredible pun, the poles. But in all the books that I read about Poland, I didn't read about the storks, you know? So
I
now
didn't know that before you just said it.
yeah, yeah. So I think that whenever you can, going to the source is going to really feed your work.
Because it gave you all of the emotional underpinnings to tell the story, even though your observations would then tell you facts and
Right.
statistics and whatever's actually right in front of you. But that emotional underpinning makes it worth reading.
Absolutely.
Because
And I did have occasion when the book was published a year and a half after that experience, actually much more than a year and a half, 5 years later it was published, to go back to Poland because I was interested in doing a documentary about the amazing reemergence of Jewish life in Poland. And I was going to I wanted to research that. But anyway, I got in touch with the Handras and was able to give them the book. And they were very moved by it. So
yeah, those are the kinds of stories that really it just runs chills. It's they're not common, and they're remarkable when you hear about them because there's such an interconnectedness, and that's a kind of a synchronous moment in someone's life.
yes.
And for you to come full circle on it from your father to you, that's just amazing.
Amazing.
I'm going to ask you a question I ask lots of creative people, especially writers. What for you then makes a good story good? That clearly is an element of it, what we just heard, that story of that interconnectedness. But what for you makes a good story good? How do you know, hey, I've hit on something and this is actually a good story?
Well, for me, it's not so much, sometimes it's the story. I guess if I want to know more about it, if I want to know more about it. But when I hesitated there, when I said I was reading late at night and I came upon an idea for my next book, now doesn't have a story yet. That has who's telling the story.
Okay.
Okay.
Well,
So
back to having a character. You've got a character.
Yes. And I'm very intrigued by what I'm going to do with her and the approach that I want to take, but I haven't found her story yet. It will come. You have to be very confident that it will come.
Talk to me a little bit now about screenwriting, because now we're talking about a third different kind of a format. You've got novels, nonfiction, and then screenwriting. You're also a screenwriter, and you're writing a screenplay now. You've written screenplays in the past. How is that different for you? Is it totally different muscle, or are you using the same? Is it the same thing? Start with characters and find a plot.
You start with characters. In this instance, I started with a mother and well, it's really a mother-daughter story, but it's a woman. I was very fascinated by the idea. I have a lot of friends in their 60s who still have their mothers. My mother died when I was 41.
Right.
And I always was wondering, what is it like to be a daughter when you're 65, And I was doing some research and talking to I really had like 8 or 10 friends that had their mothers, in their 80s, 90s, and one even had a 100th birthday party for her mother.
Right.
And just at that same point, a friend of mine who is a movie producer, she's one of the women who had her mother, and she had come back from a visit with her, and she, was ranting and raving. Her mother was driving her crazy and asked her to do this and never thanks her and da. And we were laughing about it. And she said, let's write a screenplay. And it was like, I've been tossing this idea in my mind about women in their 60s and their mothers. Sure, let's make it a screenplay instead of an essay. That'll be more fun. We'll work on it together. So we did. So in terms of the process, So the relationship was there. See, again, I was starting with a relationship.
Hmm.
And what I needed was the story. So the story became that of the woman in her 60s who um, was kind of being told from various quarters in her life that it was time for her to retire. And she's not the retiring kind.
Right.
Okay? And so it's really the story of a woman who takes care of her mother. The mother is compos mentis. She lives in an assisted living or a senior living facility. She's taking care of her mother, but also trying to figure out what she's going to do with her life. Here she is in her 60s, but it's like another turning point. You know, it's another curve in the road. So she's figuring that out. And so once I had that, once I knew that it's really the daughter's story and the mother is one of the things in her way to really coming to self-actualization at the age of 60 something, then I knew exactly what was going to happen with her.
So you said it got worked out just like all your stories do. You came to it, or it came to you, but you started out with a character that you really could
Started out
understand.
with character or characters, yes.
Interesting. And so screenwriting then it's on a parallel with writing a novel then.
It really is, because not only do I develop it the same way, and not only do I allow it, well, of course, with screenplay writing, you know, don't forget that my first real writing was the play with Alan Menken.
Right.
I love to write dialogue because then I am literally, well, not literally, but then I am really listening to my characters. And so what they're saying to each other, I'm just listening. You know, I don't know if it was James Taylor or Neil Young. There was a wonderful interview with one of those fabulous writers, and he said that all the songs I've written existed. I was just the first to hear them.
Right, exactly.
You know, and so if I'm with a character named Lauren, who's the daughter, and you know, Lauren and her mother, their scenes, they just wrote themselves. I was just typing.
The really big difference, and it's a pretty significant difference, is you can write a novel. It can be 1,500 pages if you wanted to make it such, but a screenplay has a specific form and format, and you must fit it into a certain number of pages, or it's unsellable, it's unproducible. And so you have to be conscious of that as you create those two different entities. Though getting to that story, that what you're talking about, is the same process for you. It's
the same process. I'm listening. Now, in terms of, you know, because also in a screenplay, there's not only the prescribed number of pages, but there's a pretty set structure.
Yeah.
With those 3 acts, which I kind of find helpful. I mean, I don't think that I have to be orthodox in following it. You know, the Sitfield model on page 20, this happens, on page 60, this happens. But it helps me to think of it in terms of the 3 acts. And even when I wrote for television, there were those uh-oh moments, you know,
Yes,
when
sure.
the commercial had to come in. What will happen now? And I think that's, you know, it's pretty helpful. And so for me, the writing of the dialogue is the really fun part. Of course, also in a screenplay, you can't say what people are thinking. You have to show through their actions,
yes,
or what they say. And so there's a little bit more of a challenge there.
That's because you can only deal in the 2 senses, sight and sound, because that's all an audience gets is sight and sound. They can't smell, they can't taste, they can't touch. The other thing about a novel is you can easily spike off. Not only can you hear what a character's thinking in a novel, you can actually say this is what the character's thinking, but you can also spike off and go down this road, and you go down that road, and you can go in all kinds of directions in a novel. But in a screenplay, you better stay straight and narrow on having your protagonist follow a goal to get to a resolution, or you're not likely to sell it or get it produced. That's the issue, because that's what people expect in a movie, but they expect different things in a novel. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. They want to, you know, kind of get all comfortable with a novel and, you know, hopefully hold it in their hands, or, you know, maybe read it on a screen, which I don't relate to at all. And spend time they're spending time in somebody else's story. And really, I think the reading of a novel is very much like the writing of a novel, in that you are getting lost in this other world.
How much do you believe in rewriting? How important are revisions for you?
Oh, I think they're essential. I think that you have to go, and in fact, quite pleasurable. I mean, my process, more with prose probably than the screenplay, um, is to read over what I did the day before and to make change, hate things and change them. And I mean, it's a cliche by now, but I think the computer makes it a little bit too easy to change things.
Yeah,
Okay,
computer makes it really easy, especially
it's
because
so easy.
I don't
It's
know. I
so
don't know
easy.
if you're like me, but I started out writing on a typewriter, and it was a pain
Of
to
course.
make changes.
Absolutely. Can you imagine all those little whiteout things we
Oh,
had to stare?
or retype the whole thing. It's like,
Right.
I don't want
And
to.
cutting and pasting,
Cutting and
literally,
pasting.
right? You cut
Yeah,
some out and you put the scotch tape there, and
yeah,
will it show on the zero? Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. All right, so
But
I want to.
rewriting is totally important.
Well,
Totally, it's part of the writing. Mhm.
I'm glad to hear you say that, because that's my true belief, is that writing is not actually writing, it's rewriting. And
Yeah.
that first draft is something that you get out in order. I always tell students that you're making a sculpture out of words, but you're actually making the clay to start. And so you have to make the clay, which is that first draft, and then everything else becomes shaping the clay.
Uh-huh.
That's how I
Uh-huh.
look at it, that the revisions
Absolutely.
are shaping the work.
Uh-huh.
I do want to touch on your teaching for just a moment.
Sure.
So obviously you taught for a fair chunk of time at Cal State Northridge. What would you say are the most common mistakes that new writers make?
Well, they think their work is stronger than it is. I hate to be blunt. I think they're so excited by having gotten something down on paper that, most of the students that I worked with were first generation college students, and just being there was such a huge achievement, and just getting there each day. I mean, these are not kids with cars. They live at home. A lot of the girls, especially the Hispanic girls, were coming to college against the wishes of their parents,
Interesting.
because they were supposed to help out with the family. They weren't supposed to go to college. So my admiration for them continues. And it was a privilege to work with them. And, but they still, so they felt so accomplished just by having something down on paper. And so it fell to me to kind of point out that, as wonderful as it was that they had 3 pages, maybe they could go this way. So that's the biggest mistake, is they're so happy that they have something. And I think a lot of aspiring writers have the same problem. When you tell someone you're a writer, everyone says they want to write a book,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
Everyone. And so
Well,
I say, well, do.
how hard could it be?
Yeah,
You just put pen on paper or type in your computer, and there it is.
yeah.
I think what you're alluding to, which is really good, going back half a step, is it's all still about revision. And a lot of writers, novice writers, they write their first draft and there, it's done. I don't need to do any more. And
Yeah,
that's sort of what you're
exactly.
talking about. And
Yes.
they walk away, they've got tons of grammatical errors in it. It's not complete. It's not truly got a wonderful beginning, middle, and end. It
Right.
doesn't hold your attention. It doesn't have enough conflict, all those things that happen in a novice writer's work. And it really boils down to, wait a minute, go back and revise it again and really dig in. And I think that's what you're saying.
Absolutely. And if you have, you're in a position in your life which you won't have that much, where a professional writer is your teacher, and a very willing teacher. I loved working with these kids. Someone's reading your material and making suggestions. Most of them did become, they were surprised that it needed more work, but they were open to doing it. And I think some of them, probably the more successful ones, are the ones, because it's exciting to revise. It's like, oh, I could do this. And of course, that's going to happen here. So when they got those were the students. To me, one of the most depressing things would be when, let's say, because I was teaching creative writing, which was the course was broken into short story, poetry, and drama. So I got to teach all three. And so when you have a student that's, the poetry that comes out of them is very moving, and they're very receptive to all the instruction. And a kid comes up to you and says, I think I'm going to be a poet. And this I would find depressing
because you can make so much money as a poet.
Exactly. So it's like, I was very happy for their enthusiasm, but I wanted to gently suggest that perhaps they'll have another line of work.
Perhaps being a lyricist as a poet might work a little bit better, but yeah, there's not a lot of money in the world of poetry, unfortunately, because there really should be, but there isn't. Nobody buys poetry anymore, so it's a losing proposition to go down that road as a profession.
But there are all these poetry journals, and you can submit your work, but it's a whole. You have to be committed to all the doing the research to find the titles of these poetry magazines and submitting your work, and having a very thick skin.
So you went to school at NYU, and you've taught at Cal State Northridge, both excellent schools. What is your belief in people going to school to learn the craft of writing?
Well, it can't hurt. I think it can be helpful. I never took a writing class. I learned, and I told my students, the most effective way to learn how to write is to read. And to me, that was my school, is I just read a lot of fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's kind of like by osmosis, the being able to recognize a good sentence just gets into you, and because I'm very partial to sentences. I love good sentences.
Right.
And then the story, it's great to be following along and wondering what happened. But I think that reading is a great way to learn how to write. I can't really comment. I think my students benefited, and I think the whole creative writing department at CSUN, and I'm sure at many other places, are very good. I just read yesterday that someone from Cal State Northridge was accepted at the graduate writing program at the University of Chicago. So I think these programs are very effective, and people learn a lot about the craft. So I think it can go both ways.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Well, I have been speaking for almost an hour to the excellent writer, Elyce Wakerman, who has given us so much great wisdom and so many great thoughts about how to write and be a writer. I'm just wondering, in all of your experiences over, a career's worth of time, can you share with us any kind of stories that you have that are either quirky or offbeat or weird, or maybe just plain funny?
Well, I do have a few. Some of them have to do with getting an agent.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in the book world and the screenplay world, that's a tough one. You have to get an agent, and it's tricky. It's hard. As I said just a few minutes ago, to anyone listening who is an aspiring writer or who has been a writer and is now at a place in their career where they're finding it hard to get something else, thick skin. Absolutely have to have.
For sure.
Because you're going to get rejected and rejected and rejected. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So in a couple of funny things, when I wrote the proposal for Father Loss, my father-in-law, ironically, had a friend who was an agent, and he set up a meeting with her. And first she read the proposal, liked it very much, wanted to meet me. And her name was Jean Nagar. She's a major literary agent in New York City. She's now kind of stepped back a little bit, but her agency continues. So I was very excited. I was also pregnant. And I didn't want her to know. So I wore this very loose dress this is stupid. But this is the 19, it was just a long time ago. And I thought nobody would want to represent me if I was pregnant. So I went in, I met her, I'm wearing my flowing dress. And she says, I want to represent your career. It was a big moment.
That's exciting.
Yeah. And I felt at that point that I had to tell her. And I said, I'm 5 months pregnant. And she said, of course you're pregnant. You think I can't see that? I mean, so that was my Jean Nagar story. Also, the agent, after I had written the first draft of A Tale of Two Citizens, a good friend of mine who's also in the publishing business, and he was in England, he read it. He liked it very much. He said, I have just the agent for you. I'm going to send it to him. And I think he's going to represent this book. And I was excited and all that. And months and months and months went by and I never heard from them. So this is life. This is how it happens. And I hear from Michael, the friend who made the connection. Why haven't you responded to Peter Riva? He wrote to you. He wants to talk about your book. And I never heard from him. Well, I went into spam.
Oh, there it was.
And his return address was Priva at INTL Transactions. And the subject line was, let's talk. And this was something I would never open, right? Who is this international person that says, let's talk? Well, it said, I've read your novel, let's talk. So that was kind of,
and how much time had transpired between?
I said months and months. It was probably weeks and weeks. Yeah, it was weeks and weeks later before I finally got back to him and explained what happened. And he did go on to represent the novel.
Well, that's great. Because, over weeks and weeks could be enough to turn somebody off if they're not.
Of course, he said, so Michael wrote, and thank goodness he had copied Michael on this email. And so Michael said, why didn't you ever get back to him? So that was like gift horse, I was very excited because when you get an agent to represent your work, it's such a big step.
Oh, it's a big deal.
It's a big step. And then just a brief story, quirky and odd, but certainly memorable. My husband, Jeff, when we were first in Hollywood, someone recognized his work and his talent and kind of brought him under her wing. And that person was Barbara Streisand.
Ah, yes.
Who had always been, as a kid, she was my idol. She was my idol. I used to sing, because I told you I was a singer. I used to sing in front of the mirror, Don't Rain on My Parade, and I'm the greatest star. And, and I listened to her music and wept. I mean, her voice to me is one of the lucky things about being alive right now. So Jeff was working with Barbara Streisand. Unbelievable. And so after a number of weeks, he was working on A Star Is Born. I was invited to a very early screening, just the people who had worked on it. And so I went, and she was unbelievably gracious and said, I'm sorry, I've been taking so much of his time. And I said, I couldn't breathe.
And did she help you breathe?
I think she's kind of used to that.
I'm sure she is. I'm sure people come up to her and say and do all kinds of crazy things.
I could not breathe. So we went on to actually, be friends, and I could manage to get a word or two out in her presence. Oh my goodness.
It took me a really long time in Hollywood, because I was there a long time, and it took me a long time to realize that the people that I had only seen previous to going to Hollywood, I'd only seen them in movies on the screen or on TV, and that they weren't actually real. And it took me a long time to kind of get over the notion that these are just people. They have lives, they have problems, they wake up in the morning and can't find things just like everybody else.
Sure.
It took me a while to figure that out. And she's just like that too,
Oh, absolutely. She's very accessible and very natural when you're around her. And, she's wonderful. Still a great talent. not even, I mean, just one in a million, right? One in
Eh,
a generation.
maybe more than a million, maybe one in
Yeah,
10
no,
million.
she's just remarkable. And the fact that I got through, Jeff's work, I got to actually meet her, and she knows my name. Barbara Streisand knows my name. Her
Oh,
name is Barbara, and she knows my name.
oh well,
So,
their dreams do come true, as they say. All right,
yeah.
last question for you today, Elise. Um, do you have you've already given us tons of wonderful advice, but I'm just wondering, do you have a solid piece of advice or a tip that you can lend to those that are just starting to break in, or maybe they're in a little bit and trying to get to the next level?
Well, I already mentioned have a thick skin. If you're in this game, whatever medium you choose, whether it's poetry or teleplays or screenwriting, you are going to get rejected unless you're very, very lucky. And keep at it if you believe in yourself, and more importantly, if you believe in your work. Don't take it personally. You're going to be told that in the publishing world, which, let's say I met Jean Nagar in 1981. Okay.
Mhm.
From that time until this time, you will always be told it's a bad time for publishing. It's a bad time for publishing. They're not, just let that roll right off you. Millions of books. I looked it up actually. 300,000 books in 1920 were published. Okay,
Wow.
by publishers. I'm not talking about self-publishing, which is also an option now, and there it's 1 million. So 300,000 books were published in 2020. Forget when they say it's a bad time for publishing. It's just something that they say. Maybe they're feeling it is because they've had a few rejections, but just don't let that dissuade you. Keep up. People still love to read, and especially with audiobooks now and Kindles and other ways of reading, books are being published. So that would be a big tip. When they tell you that, just don't believe it.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
sure, because it's always a struggle. It's never easy.
right, right. But the industry is growing, and it's just doing beautifully. So have faith in yourself. As we know, it's true that in this past year, of course, there was the halt of a lot of production. So I think if you're trying to get a movie made, maybe you can believe them that we're backed up. A lot of things that were in production or that were due for production kind of went on pause for a year. So that might be a true statement, that not that it's a bad time for movies, because as we know, there were some wonderful movies last year and so much television. I mean, all these dramas on TV. I think it's almost a golden age of television.
Oh, oh, it
So,
is. I think it's more of a golden age for TV than it is for movies. I think
yeah.
movies are becoming mostly spectacles, and there's not a lot of mid-range movies left anymore. Certainly not that are being produced by the bigger producers. So TV has taken that place of that mid-range storytelling.
Right. Well, I'm hoping that the movie theater isn't dead, because there is
Me
something
too. Me
to
too.
going into a theater and being with other people and having that communal experience.
Well, indeed, there's no substitute for it. Well, Elyce Wakerman, this has just been a terrific treat today to chat with you about your career and how you go about the business of being a writer, because clearly you're a dedicated writer, and that's certainly what it takes. So I can't thank you enough for coming on StoryBeat today, and I'm greatly appreciative.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. If you like this episode, won't you please take a moment to give us a comment, rating, or review on whatever app or platform you're listening to. Your support helps us bring more great StoryBeat episodes to you. StoryBeat is available on all major podcast apps and platforms, including Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, and many others. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.